Ian, I'm excited to talk with you about how HR leaders go from good to great. It is something you and I have talked about before, and I think it's pretty central to our product thesis at ChartHop and just generally how we think about elevating the HR function. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I'm Pilar, the VP of People at ChartHop, and I'm with my CEO, Ian White, who's our CEO and founder at ChartHop. For a little bit of housekeeping, if you do have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. They're on the right-hand panel, and we'll follow up with you via email to get all of those answered.
Awesome. So let's get started. Good to Great. One of my favorite books, by the way, Jim Collins, about how companies go from good to great. But when you think about the HR leader and the role of HR, what do you think going from good to great looks like in HR as an HR leader?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about throughout my career is like, when does that shift happen, or what is the kind of the delineation or demarcation point? And I think ultimately my thoughts have actually changed a lot over time. And I think I've come to realize that it isn't actually a title or a seniority thing. I think it's much more you can make that mindset shift at any point in your career. And it doesn't need to be when you're at the executive level or a senior leadership level. You could be an HR business partner or HR generalist. And I think a lot of that just has to do with how are you positioning yourself, how are you positioning the HR function, and then how are you thinking about business first when you're making decisions?
So when you think about that, what were some of the biggest unlocks for you as you made that jump or that journey?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the maybe slightly different things that I experienced, and I'd be curious if other folks felt the same, was that I was really fortunate at the start of my career to work with some HR leaders who were already really business oriented. And I also started my career in finance, working underneath a CFO. And so I kind of never didn't think of it that way. So I always had this idea that HR was, a business leadership position. But I think in our capacities, we go through various companies and environments and leadership structures where even if we have that mindset, you have to be in the right environment. And so for me, I think I had the mindset and I was fortunate to start in an environment that really facilitated it and honestly encouraged it. And I think that was part of my realization later on, is that if I hadn't had that mentorship and modeling for me, I maybe wouldn't have thought of it as early on and seen it. And it probably would have taken me longer to get to a point where I was really thinking more as a business leader than from more of a siloed HR perspective. But I'd ask like the same of you. I mean, you've worked with a ton of different HR leaders, both in-house at ChartHop, other companies that you've been at. And then you've also had exposure to a ton of HR leaders being an HR tech company founder yourself. So I'm also kind of curious what you've seen, and maybe if you've worked with HR leaders over a period of time, when have you actually seen that shift come?
I mean, I think it always comes to a recognition of the business challenges and the business problems. The best people leaders have always been great partners to the CEO, the founders, the rest of the executive team. But part of that depends on how the company is setting up the priorities. One of the challenges with HR, I think, is there's so many different priorities at any given time. Maybe it's closest to a founder CEO role in that it is constantly going from the micro and the highly tactical to the highly strategic. And it's easy, I think, to get caught in the micro. The best HR practitioners that I've worked with, and talking to one of them, is able to go from the micro to the macro and back. And it's from understanding and asking questions and being inquisitive about the business strategy and about what are the business priorities, and showing up with a point of view, right? Like, I think that uh, the HR function, the HR leader, is someone who can have a really unique perspective, someone who is sees in a way across all the different functions, understands a lot of the different data of what is happening, both at a qualitative and a quantitative level, like what's happening with revenue, what's happening with retention, what's happening with growth, and what's happening with the well-being of the people? Do we have the right people? To go back to Good to Great, the book, do we have the right people on the bus? Do we have the right people in the right positions, the right roles? And I think in HR, the best practitioners are thinking about the business problems first, with people as the unique lens and point of view on what they can bring to the executive conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And you bring up something that I was talking with actually someone in our team at ChartHop last week, on the customer success side, about how challenging it can be to be in an HR leadership role where HR is such a broad function. So we experience like tremendous breadth, and we're often a function that's not scaling very significantly in terms of headcount at the earlier stages. And so you do have to think about going from adding someone into a payroll system 1 minute to working on an immigration case to an employee relations issue to reviewing revenue numbers with the CEO. And that might just be in the span of like 2 hours. And it is vastly different work. And so I think sometimes we are uniquely challenged in HR where, because we have a lot of breadth and we don't often have really large teams, we're constantly kind of figuring out how do we be business leaders, but also get all this other work done that the business needs from us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I mean, even just thinking about some of our conversations, we go from across the board, across the gamut very quickly. But when you've got kind of, when you take the data piece and you make that piece easy to access the same view of data across CEO and people leader and rest of executive function, like that, that unlocks like a big roadblock. Like we're at least like talking about the same things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it is like you need to be able to dive to the level of, you know, one particular employee relations issue to the macro issue of maybe a broader challenge around recruiting or engagement or a bigger business challenge.
Yeah. And for me, I think the HR leaders that I've seen best embody it are those who have either an MBA or a quant background or finance. Like, I think a lot of the folks who grew up around data, I think I see them make that progression or that transition much quicker and sooner in their career because they've already either learned the language, they understand business acumen, they've trained or been mentored underneath executives where that's been critical and important to do their job, maybe because they were in a capacity that was in HR and they made that transition over. But I've definitely seen that as something where they show up and they have that business first mentality.
Yeah, and the mentality, it's partly about data and it's partly about alignment, right? It's like, you know, HR, like any executive, brings a particular view, but it always has to be in service of the alignment towards what is the business trying to achieve.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And because this related back to what I said at the beginning around you building Chart Hop, and obviously this was something that you and I talked about when I initially interviewed and met you, I'm curious how you think about leveraging or elevating HR leaders and how that influenced the way that you thought about it when you were building the platform way back day one, but also today.
Well, first of all, it was bringing people data and business data together because you can't think about one without the other in my view. And so it was also, I think, from the very beginning, democratizing that data so that the right leaders can have access to the data without it having to be a data pulling exercise for the people team. And so I think the kind of fragmentation we see a lot of when data is spread out among a bunch of different spreadsheets and people systems, we really try to resolve that fragmentation. And I think AI takes that to another level where if the AI has the right data context, the AI can both take a lot of routine work off of your plate and give you answers and give you insights just by sort of asking the question. So I'm actually curious, as you onboarded into ChartHop itself, how did using the AI change the way you had onboarded at prior organizations in the past?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always been really hard for me historically is when I'm not the first HR person at a company, which I have done a number of times, but not every time. I'm going in and I'm trying to like drop into a moment in time, not just where do I want to see the company go and why was I hired or what's the 1 to 2 to 3 year plan. And I think what's always been really tough is like how quickly can I get grounded in the business numbers and the data and the people side. And for me, what was like vastly accelerated was I was able to understand both, I think AI accelerates your ability to get data, but I wasn't requiring a lot of resources to get to that point. I think, again, in the past, I've either needed to leverage like data analytics teams, data science teams, and I'm kind of like staring at this like mass of data, and I maybe don't have either the tools or the resources to comb through it to understand it. And so that was a big difference for me where I got to understand from both a historical perspective and like that moment in time, where is ChartHop as a business? And I think ultimately, as you and I both know, most business problems are people problems because people are the ones making decisions and doing things. And so if I was taking a look, really what I'm trying to understand is like what's the health of the business, what's going on with the business, and then from a people perspective, how can we leverage a people strategy to improve it, enable it, enhance it. And I think that takes a long time to understand because you don't want to make the wrong recommendations too quickly. You want to be careful because organizations are very sensitive, they're very fragile in a way. And even one change in one direction can make a really big impact. I think a lot of times, as an HR leader, when you're coming in, you're going to be very careful as to what you're going to recommend and you want to take your time. And I think that got greatly accelerated for me, where maybe I would have waited 3 to 6 months to feel fully comfortable. And I think ultimately for you and I, by day 45, I felt like, okay, I'm in, I understand the data, I know where the business is at. I felt comfortable making recommendations, understanding maybe where we were shortfall in terms of like resourcing or where we were heavier, where the performance was best. And that can take a lot of time. And I think ultimately, if you don't have the data in the right place, I don't think you can connect it as quickly. I think it takes a lot longer to understand the business and the people data being ultimately the same thing in my eyes.
And so I mean, I talk to people leaders every day. And what I hear from folks all the time is my data is a mess. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin to get this information together. Like, what would your advice be?
Yes, I understand. That would be the first thing I'd say is like, yes. I think actually one of the things that's been really nice, you and I talk about AI a lot, but data cleanliness and data hygiene, of the things that I think AI is really good at, I think data analysis is one of them. I think like spot checking and data hygiene is actually another really good one. Obviously, you do need to be careful. It's one of the reasons why we're able to do this in ChartHop is it's all contained. And so you're not dumping like, PII into an LLM and it's like contained within our platform. But I think part of it is like accelerate and automate, find ways to do that data hygiene much quicker because ultimately the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to make that data usable. And I think ultimately, as we like all know, data is only as good as it is real and meaningful and legitimate and like reviewed. And so if you don't have good data, you basically can't trust anything you're going to extrapolate from it. So unfortunately, I do think that becomes like the priority, but I think relative to even like 1 or 2 years ago where you did need a lot more resourcing to get that data cleaned up, I think now it's much easier with AI if you're able to do it in a secure environment.
Yeah. And so data cleanliness and getting data together is one piece, but there's a bit of a mindset shift as well. Like how would you express to other HR practitioners the mindset shift and the journey?
Yeah, I think from my vantage point, it's been really incredible to see a lot of HR teams move in this direction. I think they have seen really early on that data is important and not just, again, people data, HR data, but that business data and HR data being more connected. And so I think for me, there's like a few things I think about. One, understand the systems that all the business data lives in, have access to those systems, be able to view the information coming in and out of it. I think oftentimes in HR, we are like the resident marketing person, the resident salesperson, right? Like we become part of the teams that we're supporting. And I think it's important for us to have familiarity with those data models, with those software and tools and all of that. And then you're able to understand, okay, if I understand where the business is living, the software that they're using, the data they're compiling, how do I then translate that on the HR side, right? I think, you and I have been able to look at client information, client data, gong recording calls, a bunch of stuff. And that leads us to people conclusions and decisions, right? And so I think when you are not close to the systems and the resources that your teams are using that you support, I think it's much harder to make that transition. And so that would be maybe the first thing I'd recommend is like spend time with the business. Where are they spending their time? Where are they collecting their data? What are they analyzing? Are they analyzing the right things? Do you understand it? I think being a part-time data analyst is actually really critical in HR. And I think it's one of the skill sets that is often the hardest to improve when you are in an HR capacity doing 100 million things that we're doing every single day. But you have to live and breathe what it's like to be an AE or a head of sales or marketing specialist to really understand how to support and grow with those teams.
And if you were to say to an HR practitioner today where they might need to shift their time, like what is different maybe about where we're going and what the role of and function of HR looks like in the coming years versus where it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I would be curious your perspective too, because I have one, but I see it from like the flip side of what you see. I think from my perspective, a lot of the work in HR from an ops and workflow perspective is getting automated. And so how do we further do that? Right? Those are things that we can kind of like click and forget. So get as much of that as possible automated into systems, workflows with agents, AI, whatever it might be, and then spend more time kind of on the business, like thinking about the programs. It's easy for you and I to say, like, we need to have performance reviews twice a year. But in order to make them impactful, we do really need to understand like what's going on with the business and where do we need to change our programming to support it. But I'd be curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the automation journey in HR is still actually pretty early in terms of where people are on their journey. There's a lot more capability to automate than there was even a year ago with agents, but there's probably a year from now going to be even more capability. So I think continuing to understand what's possible there and
Mm-hmm.
just like anything that is, I think a lot of HR practitioners got into HR because they're interested in people on some level and interested in the the psychology of organizational and people performance. And so being able to spend more time on that that's backed by data, I think is where is certainly what we're seeing today and what I think where we're headed. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would look at everything that can possibly be automated, automate everything that is data that is hard, that is should be in the hands of managers, should be in the hands of business stakeholders. Like make it possible for people to self-serve that information as much
Yeah.
as possible with a shared data source so that everybody's on the same page about what the data is. And now from there we can make the really the strategic planning around where are we today, where do we want to be, what organization do we need to build to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the conversations that I think great HR leaders are driving and will be able to drive even more of in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do think we are still early on in the automation journey, which is exciting. I think there's a lot of development and improvement with tools that have happened in the last even 45 days where we've seen a dramatic improvement in their success rate, which has been really awesome. We're coming down to the final moments of our time together. Any last thoughts before I wrap us up, Ian?
I just think that this is a really exciting time for great HR leaders to get much more leverage and have a much bigger impact than what was possible before. And that's because of what's happening with technology, with AI, but also with what's happening culturally in the discipline. And I think there's a real great opportunity for great HR leaders to be great business partners.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me and everybody who was able to listen. If you want to learn more about us at ChartHop, you can visit our website, charthop.com, or we also have a virtual booth You can go up to the exhibitors tab at the top of the page and come check it out. But we really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody.